You don't tense up because someone loves you. You tense up because something inside you immediately starts calculating. How much will this take from me? What will be expected later? What part of myself will I eventually have to give up? You may not consciously think these words, but your body does. Your nervous system does. The tightening in your chest, the urge to pull back when someone leans in, the discomfort when care is offered freely without conditions you can see or control. You've been told, maybe even told yourself, that you fear intimacy or that you're emotionally unavailable. But that's not accurate. You are available. You are capable. You are often deeply loving. What you fear is the bill that arrives after the affection. Because at some point in your life, love was never free. It came with strings, with responsibility, with emotional labor far beyond your capacity. It cost you rest. It cost you choice. It cost you safety. So you learn to protect yourself not by rejecting love outright, but by minimizing your need for it. You learn to survive on less, to carry your own weight, to owe no one anything. And here is the paradox, the quiet betrayal at the heart of your psychology. The independence that once protected you is now the very thing preventing intimacy from nourishing you. What saved you then is sabotaging you now. You don't fear love. You fear what it demands of you once you let it in.
Psychologically, this pattern sits at the intersection of avoidant attachment, parentification, and hypervigilance of emotional cost. Let's start with parentification. Parentification occurs when a child is placed, emotionally or practically, into the role of caretaker, sometimes overtly, sometimes quietly. The child becomes responsible not just for themselves, but for the emotional stability of others. Love, in this environment, is never passive. It is work. The child learns, if I am loved, I must do something to earn it. If I am connected, I must manage someone else's emotional state. Over time, this wires love and obligation together in the nervous system. Then comes avoidant attachment, not because the child doesn't want closeness, but because closeness has historically meant overextension. The avoidant response is not rejection, it is self-preservation. Add hypervigilance, and the nervous system becomes a cost analysis machine. Every relationship, every emotional exchange, every moment of intimacy is subconsciously scanned for hidden demands. Neurologically, the brain learns to associate closeness with activation instead of rest. The default mode network, which governs self-referential thought, becomes oriented around monitoring and self-regulation rather than co-regulation. You don't relax into others, you brace. Love doesn't feel soft. It feels binding. So you unconsciously ask, how much autonomy will I lose? How long before I'm responsible again? This is not cynicism, it's conditioning.
The deepest tragedy of this adaptation is not loneliness. It's exhaustion without acknowledgement. You carry an invisible grief, the grief of having learned early that your needs were expensive, that closeness required vigilance, that softness had consequences. So you learn to be low maintenance, to not ask, to not lean, to not need. Philosopher Simone Weil wrote about decreation, the slow erasure of the self, in order to belong. That is the unseen cost paid here. You make yourself smaller, simpler, more manageable. You trade authenticity for freedom. You trade connection for control. The core fear driving this pattern isn't abandonment. It's enslavement. The fear that love will consume your boundaries, your time, your identity. That being close means disappearing. So even joy becomes complex. Rest becomes suspicious. Dependence becomes a threat. Moments that should feel warm, being cared for, being held, being helped, feel heavy, like something you'll have to repay later with interest. This is invisible grief. No one sees it because you function so well. You are capable, reliable, self-contained. But containment without release becomes pressure. And pressure eventually fractures something.
This wound doesn't stay theoretical. It manifests everywhere. You might recognize these patterns. In romantic relationships, you stay one step ahead. You give just enough, but not so much that you feel trapped. You withdraw when things feel too stable. You struggle to receive care without guilt. When someone supports you, you instinctively look for ways to compensate. You overvalue independence and undervalue interdependence. Needing someone feels like failure, not humanity. At work, you take on too much responsibility, not because you want power, but because relying on others feels risky. Your boundaries are rigid or invisible. You either overfunction or disappear, rarely occupying the middle. Internally, you feel safest when nothing is expected of you, but also strangely unseen. Here's the crucial reframing. These are coping strategies, not personality traits. You are not too much or too distant. You adapted to an environment where love had a cost you couldn't afford. Unlearning begins with witnessing rather than correcting. You stop shaming yourself for pulling back. You stop insisting you should be different. Instead, you get curious. What am I protecting right now? What cost am I anticipating? Awareness disrupts automation.
Healing this wound doesn't mean forcing yourself to accept love blindly. It means renegotiating your relationship with cost. Practices like inner child reparenting work not because they are symbolic, but because they reteach the nervous system that need does not equal danger. You learn, slowly, that care can exist without debt. Shadow work invites you to meet the part of yourself that equates closeness with loss, to listen instead of override, to let softness exist without self-betrayal. Healing looks like practicing receiving without repayment, allowing someone to care without immediately balancing the scales. Philosopher Martin Buber wrote, "All real living is meeting, but meeting requires trust. Not that the cost will be zero, but that it will be shared." Love isn't meant to drain you. It's meant to distribute weight. You were never meant to carry everything alone. You don't need to be fixed. You don't need to be less independent. You don't need to stop protecting yourself. You only need to learn that love no longer costs what it once did. And the moment you allow that possibility, even briefly, you aren't weak. You're becoming whole. If this video named something you've carried silently, share it. Subscribe, not because something is wrong with you, but because understanding yourself is the most radical form of freedom.